Alright then gang, so far in our website we've made only one type of request, and that is a GET request, and we've had handlers for those GET requests when we've said things like app.get. Now these types of requests are typically to get a resource from the server, whether that be JSON data from the database or a web page. Doesn't really matter, they are all GET requests. But there's other types of requests too. So we have GET requests to request data from the server. We also have POST requests to create new data in our database. So typically when we have a web form and hit submit, then we send a POST request to the server with that new data and it can be added to the database. We also have delete requests to delete data, for example, deleting a single blog document from the database. And we also have put requests to update existing data. Now, so far, we've seen how we can send GET requests from a browser and handle those on a server. For example, we have this route /blogs. That is a GET request, and that gets us a web page with a list of all of the blogs inside it. We also have a GET request for /blogs/create, and that gets us a web page with the web form on it. But we also need routes to interact with our data in other ways. For example, we need one to add a new blog document after we've filled in the form and then hit submit. So that needs to send a request to add a new blog, and that would be a POST request. Now the route would be /blogs, the same as this one up here. So how can that be? Well, that's absolutely fine because this is a GET request and this is a POST request. So we can use the same routes for different types of requests because GET requests and POST requests can be handled differently from each other on the server. So that's fine. So when we click on submit on our web form, we're going to send a POST request to this URL and we're going to handle that on the server to add a new document to the database. Now, we'd also need a route item to get a single blog item, and that would look like this, /blogs/ID, where this ID variable right here changes dependent on the blog that we want to get. So it would go out and get the blog from the database with this ID, and that would be a GET request. Now, another route for deleting a blog would look something like this, /blogs/ID. And again, this would be the ID of the blog we want to delete. And again, these are the same, but it doesn't matter because we can handle a GET request separately from a delete request on the server. Finally, you might also have routes for updating blogs, and that would look something like this as well, where we have the ID that changes, but that would be a put request. So this route structure is the typical structure of a simple CRUD application. For every different data type or resource we have, for example, blogs, users, books, authors, whatever the resource type might be, it might look quite similar to this kind of structure of URLs and types of requests. So in our application, we're not going to use the put request. We're not going to update blogs, but we are going to do the rest. Now we've already handled these two at the top, /blogs, to get the index view with all of the blogs embedded in it. We've handled this request, /blogs/create, which gets us the web page with the web form on to add a new blog. So we need to do these three now. A POST request to add new data, a GET request to get a single blog, and a delete request to delete a single blog. Let's look at the POST request first of all. Alright then, so imagine you're a user on this website and you want to add a new blog. Then I'm guessing you would go to new blog, you'd add in a load of junk, and then you click on submit to add this new exciting blog to the website. Now at this point, we need to fire a POST request to the server with all of this data included in the POST request. Then on the server, we can handle that POST request. We can take all of that data, create a new instance of a blog document using the blog model we created, add this data to that instance, and then save that document to the database. So that's the sequence of events that needs to occur. So the first thing we need to do is send a POST request from this web form when we click on submit. Now there's a couple of ways we can do that. We can do that using the Fetch API or some other asynchronous library from JavaScript, or we can do it directly from the web form itself. So we're going to do it from the web form itself. And to do that, we need to open up our create view. And all we need to do is add a couple of things right here. So inside the form tag, we need, first of all, an action attribute. And that is basically going to be a value to where we want to send this request to. Well, the URL for this post request is going to be to /blogs, right? We saw that in the different request URL chart we saw before. So we also need another attribute, and that is going to be method. And that is the request method. So this is going to be a post request. Now, when we click on submit, this is going to send a post request to this URL right here. Now, we also want it to send all of this data and attach it to the body of the post request so we can access that on the server. And to do that, we need to add name attributes to these input fields. So the name of this one is just going to be the same as the ID, probably, the title. The name of this one is going to be the snippet. And the name of this one at the bottom is going to be body. Okay? So then, when we access the form data on the server, we'll use these properties to access that form data. All right then, so that's all we need to do. So when we click on this button now, it's going to send this post request. Now we need to handle that on the server. So what we need to do is, first of all, come down to blog routes over here, and I'm going to create a post handler. So to do that, we say app.post. So before we handled get requests, now we're handling a post request. So app.post, and we want to scope this to /blogs. That's where we're sending the request to right here. And then we want to fire back a callback function. So let's say request and response. And inside, we want to save a new blog document to the database, but we need access to all that data that comes along for the ride in this post request when we click on submit. This data, and this data. So how do we get that? Well, first of all, we need to use a bit of middleware, which is going to parse the data that we send into a workable format that we can use, and it's going to attach it to this request object. So I'm going to come up to where we use some middleware, and below the static middleware right here, I'm going to paste this in. So it's middleware that comes along with Express. So we say app.use express.url encoded, and then we say extended is true inside. We don't need to do this. This is just an option that you can add in. So this basically takes all the URL encoded data that comes along for the ride, and it passes that into an object that we can use on the request object. So down here inside this post request handler, we can now access request.body. And that contains all the information we need from the web form. Let me just log this to the console so I can show you. Request.body, like so. And we're going to open up the console down here. Okay, let's send a request now. So if I go over here and just click on submit, then it's going to reload the page. That's the default action of a form. When we click on submit, we'll sort that later. But if we go over here, we don't see anything logged to the console. And that's because we actually need to refresh this page to catch the front end changes we made over here. So schoolboy error, let's refresh the page and let's add in a load of stuff again. Submit. And now if we go back over here, we can see this object right here. We have the title, the snippet, and the body. So all of that now is attached to request.body, and that's because we used this thing right here. Okay. If we didn't use this right here, let me comment that out and let me come over here again. If we try to submit this again, let me refresh over here, continue. Let me just go back. In fact, this will be quicker. Okay, if we try to do this again, add in a load more data, submit, then come down here, it's undefined. So we can only do this stuff where we get the request.body if we use this middleware right here. Okay, and that's for accepting form data. So let me save that now. And now down here, what do we want to do with this data? Well, really, we just want to save it to the database. But first of all, we need to create a new instance of a blog. So let's do that. Let's say const blog is equal to new blog. And we pass in an object with a different properties, remember. But that object looks very much like this object right here. So all I need to do really is just say, okay, well, request.body. Then we're passing that object in, which is this thing right here. So we're creating a new blog with a title, snippet, and body. And that's all we need to do. So now we have that, we can say blog.save to save this to the database. It's asynchronous, returns a promise. So we tack on .then and fire a callback function when this has done. So we can take the result here just in case we use it in the future. But at this point, what do we want to do? After a user has clicked on this button right here, yeah, and it submits that to the server, we save that to the database. What do we want to do then? What do we want the user to see? Well, I'd like to redirect them back to the home page so they can see that new blog right here on the list. So all we need to do is say response.redirect, and we're going to redirect to /blogs, which is where all the blogs are listed. So we also can attach the catch block right here, which catches any errors if there are any, and then we can log that to the console for now like that. Okay, so let's see if this works. I'm going to go to add a new blog. First, I need to stop that request. Go to add a new blog. The blog title is going to be like Yoshi's Party, and the blog snippet is come and have a good time. Wow, sounds amazing. Let's just put in a lot of rubbish here. Okay, so submit this, and now we get redirected to the homepage once this is done. And now we can see that new document right here. And if we go to the database and we refresh over here, we should see that new document here as well, which we do right here. Awesome. Okay then, so now we've handled these three routes right here. We still need to do these two right here. One for a GET request to get a single blog, and one is a delete request to delete a single blog. Now to address those, we need to learn about this part of the route right here, and they are called route parameters. So then, what are route parameters? Well, route parameters are the parts of a route that are variable or could change. In this route, for example, this part in green, the ID would be variable and it could change dependent on the blog that we want to get. So for example, we could go to /blogs /12345, and this right here would be the route parameter, or /50, and this would be the route parameter. It could even be /hello. It doesn't have to be a number. We're not setting up rules. We're saying here that this part of the route is changeable. It's like a variable that a user types in. And we want to be able to extract this to see if it's an ID, and then we can query the database for the document with that ID and send it back to the user. So we need a way in Express to extract a route parameter from a URL so we can use it. Okay then, so there's a couple of things I want to do here with route parameters. The first thing I want to do is surround all of these with links so that they go to /blogs / the ID of that particular blog. Now remember, each blog document has this ID, and when we use Mongoose, it converts this into a string for us. So this ID property at the top right here, we have access to inside our index view on each blog, because we go out, we get all of the blogs, and we're passing those into the index view, and we have that _ID property on each blog right here. So what I'm going to do is actually surround the H3 and the paragraph tag with an anchor tag. So let me do that first of all, and put the closing bracket at the end, so /A, okay, and let me just explain what this is doing. So we are now surrounding this with an anchor tag to /blogs / and then we're outputting a dynamic variable which is on the blog, and that is the ID. So it's going to be /blogs / whatever the ID is for that blog. I've also given this a class of single for CSS, and we'll do that later, but for now let's save this and go over to view this in a browser. I'm going to refresh, and now if we click on one of these, for example, we go to /blogs and then / the ID of that blog. Now it's going to change this ID dependent on what blog we click on. All right, so now we need to handle this request right here. It's a GET request to this URL /blogs / the ID. So we need to now extract this route parameter from the URL in a request handler. So let's set that up. So over here, underneath the post request, we'll do this. So down here, I'm going to say app.get, and it's going to be for /blogs, / and then to denote a route parameter, we use colon and ID. If we just said, for example, ID, then it's going to look for /ID literally, not an actual ID. So there needs to be a colon in front of whatever you want to call the route parameter. All right. So then, now we have that, we need a callback function. We're taking the request and the response object as always. And inside this function, I want to try and find a single document in the database with this ID. But first of all, I need to extract this ID. Well, we can get that from the request object. So I can say const ID is equal to request. Then we use the params property, and then we use the ID. So whatever we called it right here, if you called this nuts, then you'd say params.nuts. All right, makes no sense. So let's stick with ID. All right, so we have the ID. Let's just log this to the console to make sure it works. Console.log ID. All right, open up your console and then let's try this out. Go back and click on one of these, and it's going to hang because we're not sending a response, but we can see the ID logged to the console. So we know that works. We've got the ID. Now we need to retrieve the document with this ID from the database. So we use the blog model, capital B, remember, then find by ID, and we pass in the ID right here. This is asynchronous, takes some time. We tack on the then method and we get the results in a callback function. Now, what do we want to do with this result? Well, ultimately, we want to render a details page. So we need to create a details view shortly, but let's just set this up for now. Render, and it's going to be called details, this view, and we want to pass through the data that we get back. So the blog is what we'll call it, but you can call the property anything you want, and that is going to be equal to the result because this result will be the single blog based on this ID. We also need to send in a title. Like every other route, we have a title, right? And the title for this page is going to be blog details, like so. So that's what we're doing in the then method. After we've got the blog, we send it into a view, which we're going to create in a second. First of all, let's catch any errors if there are any, and just log those to the console. All right, sorted. So now we need to create this details view right here. So let me go over to views and create a new file called details.ejs. And in here, I'm just going to paste some HTML code in, then explain it so you don't have to watch me write it out from scratch. So we open up the HTML tag, we include the head partial, like we do in the other views. We include the nav partial. At the bottom, we include the footer one as well. This is the actual content we're concerned about. Now remember, inside here, we pass through the blog, which is the result, so the blog object. So we have access to that right here, and we have a div with a class of details and contents. Then we have this blog object, and we access the title property on the blog, which we have. Under that, we output the body property as well, inside a div and a paragraph tag. At the bottom, we've got this anchor tag right here, which is to delete a specific blog later on. So don't worry too much about this now. In fact, I'm going to delete this for now, so we're not worrying about it, and just save it like that. So we're just outputting the blog title and the blog body, right? Dead simple. So we're sending that details view back. Let's save this and see if it works. So let me come over here and go back and then click on one of these, Yoshi's Party, and it should work, but I think it's not doing. Okay, let's see if we get an error. Render is not defined. Okay, sorry, we need to say response.render right here. So save that and go back. Let's try this again. New blog 2, and we still get some kind of error. So let's have a look. Okay, not working just yet. Okay, so there was just a lag, I think, and it does actually work. So if we click on one of these again, yep, we see the title and the content. And if we click on a different one, we see the title and the content. Awesome. Now, I do also just want to add a couple of styles to this page right here. So let me just go to the styles inside the public folder, and I want to scroll to index styles, and I'm going to paste these things in right here. So just two things. So blogs A, which is this thing right here, the anchor tag surrounding each blog. What I'm doing with that is saying display that as blog, give it a bit of margin, padding left, and then a border left, which is crimson, like a red color. And when we hover over those, the H3, which is the blog title, the color of that text is going to be red as well. Just makes it look a bit better. So let's refresh this, and there we go. That's all working. So now we have our details page sorted. Alright then gang, so we are slowly getting there. The only route left to do is this one right here, which should be a delete request to delete a specific blog document. And again, we're going to have the same route structure as this one right here, where we use a route parameter. This time though, we need to send a delete request and handle that instead of a get request. So let's do that now. So then we want to be able to delete blogs from the front end, and we could do this from a delete button or link on each blog details page. So if we click on a specific blog, maybe we see a delete icon somewhere, we click on that, that sends a delete request to the server, then we go out to the database from the server and delete the blog with that ID, all right? So before we do anything, we need some kind of button or something to click to send that request. So back in details, I'm just going to paste back in the anchor tag that we had right here. We give this a class of delete, and we give this a data attribute. Now this is a special attribute inside HTML where we can basically add our own custom attributes. I've called this doc. So we say data hyphen, then whatever we want to call this attribute. And I've set this equal to a value. And this value is going to be the blog ID that we want to delete. Remember, we have access to the blog in the blog details page. So we're just getting the ID of that and storing it in this custom data attribute so that when we click on this, we can grab this data in some JavaScript down here, and using the fetch API, we're going to send a delete request to delete that document with that ID. So before we do anything, let's save this and look at it over here. Yep, looks absolutely pants. So let's just add a little bit of CSS. So in the detail styles, I'm going to paste in a couple, or rather 3 styles. So first of all, the details class, which is this thing right here, the div surrounding everything. I'm saying that is going to be position relative, and I need to do that because I'm positioning the delete anchor tag absolutely relative to this, okay? So we're saying we want this to be in the top right, and the border radius is going to be 50% of this thing. That curves the corners so it looks a bit more like a circular kind of button. The padding is 8 pixels. Then delete hover, which is the hover effect. We're going to say the cursor is pointer, so the little hand, and give this some box shadow. So let me save this and preview again, and now we see this thing over here. All right, so we will make this maybe an icon later so it looks better still, because to be honest, it still looks pretty pants. But nonetheless, when we click on this now, we want to send a delete request to the server. Now we're going to do that in vanilla JavaScript on the front end. So important to notice, this is not going to be JavaScript that is running on the server. This is going to be running in the browser when we click on this, because in our view over here, if we add a script tag, for example, at the bottom, if we do this, any script inside this script tag is going to run in the browser when it reaches the browser, not on the server, okay? So we're going to run through this really quickly because this is not a front-end JavaScript course. And as I said, you should already understand about front-end JavaScript, asynchronous code, and all that kind of jazz. If you want to learn about that, I've got a free modern JavaScript course on the YouTube channel and a premium one on Udemy. The links to both of those are going to be down below. So I'm going to first of all get a reference to this thing. To do that, I'm going to say const, and we'll call it trash can, even though it's not a trash can yet, but we will maybe use a trash can image later on. And I'm going to set that equal to document.querySelector to grab this element, and we're going to grab a.delete. So it has a class of delete, so we're going to grab this element. So we have a reference to that now. So now we need to add an event listener to this so we can detect when a user clicks on this. So to do that, I'm going to say trashcan.add event listener, and that event is going to be a click event, so click, and then we fire a function where we take the event object as a parameter, And inside, we want to send a delete request now to the server, and we're going to use the fetch API to do that. But before we do that, where are we going to send this request to? Well, we'll store that inside a constant so we can reference it later, and we'll call it endpoint and set it equal to a template string, which is backticks. That's below the escape key on most keyboards. So this is going to go to /blogs / and then we want to output a variable. Now, this is going to be the ID, right? So we can get the ID from this attribute right here. And the way we access that is by saying trashcan, which is our reference to that element, .dataset. And that's anything that uses this data attribute. Then the name of this thing right here. So .doc, because that's what we called it. All right. So this is the endpoint. So it's going to be /blogs / whatever the ID is right here. So we want to send a delete request to that endpoint. How do we do that? Well, we use the fetch API and we specify that we want to send it to the endpoint. That's the first argument. And then we pass in an object. And this is like an options object for the fetch API to say what type of request we want to send, etc. The only thing we need to say is the method, which is going to be a delete request. So before we had a post request, we've also seen get requests. Now the method of this is a delete request. So that's it. It sends out a request now from the JavaScript to this endpoint with that blog ID in it. And it says that this is a delete request. So when it gets to the server, then we know it's a delete request and we can handle it as such. All right then, so this right here is asynchronous and we can attach a then method to it. So when it's done, it's going to fire the then method. So I'll do that. I'll say .then and we'll fire some kind of function, and we'll come back to this later. In fact, let's just do this for now. And we can also tack on a catch block to catch any kind of error. And then we'll just log that to the console if there is an error. Okay. So again, if this was all over your head, then definitely check out my modern JavaScript course first of all to understand all of this. Okay then, so now we're sending this. When we click on this button, we need to handle this on the server. So let's go back to our app.js file, and we need now a handler for the delete request. So let's do that down here. I'm going to say app.delete this time to handle a delete request. This is to the same route as this, so let's copy and paste that right here. Then we need a callback function when this request comes in. So we take the request object, the response object, and over here inside this function we want to say first of all the ID. So const ID is equal to the request.params.id. Remember, that's how we access the wrap parameter. So we have the ID. Now we can use the blog model to say we want to find by ID and delete. That is the method we use, and we just pass in an ID, which is the ID we get from the route parameter. So this goes out to the database, it finds a record or a document by the ID, and it deletes it from the database. Again, asynchronous. We tack on the .then method and we take the result. And what we're going to do here is send back some JSON to the front end, the browser. Now, why are we not redirecting here? Well, when we send an AJAX request, which is what this is, because we're doing it from JavaScript, we're not doing it from a web form or anything like that. This is an AJAX request. When we send that type of request in Node, we cannot use a redirect as a response. We can't do that. We have to send maybe JSON or text data back to the browser. Okay, so what we're going to do is actually send some JSON data back to the browser, and that JSON data is going to have a redirect property. Right? Now, when we receive that data back over here, we're going to look at that redirect property, and that redirect property is going to be a URL to where we want to redirect to, and then that's going to be done from the front end because we can't do it on the server because this is an AJAX request. I hope that makes sense. It might seem long-winded and around the houses, but this is the way we're going to do it. So if I go back to app.js, what I'm going to do inside here is say response. And the way we send some JSON back is by saying response.json. Now, this is the typical response we'd use for an API where We can, reach out with JavaScript to get data or delete data and all that kind of jazz. So that's the reason I'm doing it this way. I want to show you how to do this. So response.json, and in here we're going to pass an object, and the redirect is going to be to /blogs. So what we're saying is after this is complete, when it's deleted that, then come back here and we'll send a response to the browser. It's going to be a JSON object, and we're going to pass that on the front end. Look at this property and say, okay, well, I'm going to redirect myself in the browser to this URL, and it will do that for us. Okay. Now, before we do that, let's tack on the catch method right here, so we can take any error if there is one and log that to the console. So console.log error. Cannot type. Okay, so let us now save that and go to the front end. So over here, when all this is done and the response here is sent to us, then we get that JSON back inside here, and we get that JSON back as JSON, which we can't readily use. So we need to take that JSON data. So let me just say this is going to be the response, right? That's the JSON data that comes back to us. And right here, we need to use a method on that. So we say response.json. We can use this right here. And what that does is return another promise whereby it passes this JSON data into an actual JavaScript object that we can use. So I can tack on another then method where we get access to that actual JavaScript object, which I'm going to call data. And I'll tell you what we'll do for now is we'll just log that to the console, console.log data. So this right here, we don't need the semicolon, this right here should all work. We click on this, it sends a request to the server deletes that document based on the ID, it sends JSON as a response. In this thing right here, we take that JSON, we pass it into a JavaScript object, which we can use, and we get access to that right here, and then we're just logging that to the console. Okay, save it, and let's refresh and give this a whirl. I am going to cross my fingers because that was a large amount of code we did, and I'm hoping we don't get an error. So let's try this. Delete, and yes, we get this back. Okay, so we get this object back. Now if we go back over here, remember new blog 2, that shouldn't be there. So it's been deleted. It's no longer in the database. If I refresh this, we should see 2 instead of 3 now, which we do. Awesome. So that is all working. So the only thing left to do now is to redirect on the front end instead of this console.log, because that's not very useful to a user. So how do we redirect from the front end? Well, we take the window object and we say .location, and then we say .href, and we set it equal to where we want to go, and that's going to be the data that we get back .redirect. That was the property attached to that data object. If we take a look over here, no, we don't get that response anymore. If we take a look over here, we can see that was the property, right? So now when we get this response back, hopefully we should redirect back to the blog's page. So let's try this once more time. Delete it, it deletes it, redirect us. Awesome, all working. And now, my friends, we have handled pretty much everything we need to do. We've got get requests, post requests, and delete requests going on. So now I want to move away from this, and in the next video I want to talk about MVC and the Express router, just to tidy everything up a bit.